Hi, everyone. My name is Shauna K. Salmon. I'm the Creative Associate here at the IIP. On behalf of the IIP, I want to thank you for joining our forum on police use of force. The IIP is a prosecutorial reform think tank dedicated to criminal justice that promotes community-centered standards of safety, fairness, and dignity. This panel is a part of a series of virtual panels that the IIP has been hosting since the COVID pandemic has shifted us to remote operations. After this panel is over, we will post the full video as well as additional resources on the remote panel discussions page on our website, which we will link in the chat. Please join us for the following upcoming remote events. Next Wednesday at 11 a.m., we will host a panel on the challenges of coming home from prison during COVID and beyond. On Thursday, June 25th, our book club conversation will focus on Tutwiler, a new Marshall Project Frontline documentary film about women in an Alabama prison who support each other through pregnancy, labor, and saying goodbye to their newborns. Additionally, our partners at Arts Society will be launching a podcast next Wednesday and then the 4 subsequent Wednesdays featuring criminal justice reform and human resiliency explored through the arts. It will also be featured on our website, which we will also link in the chat. To stay up to date on all of these events and future events, please follow us at IIP_John J. We invite you to send your questions throughout this panel. You can click the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send your question directly to the host. With that being said, here at the IIP, we have adopted the practice of doing a living land acknowledgement before all of our events. This is specific to New York City, but we highly encourage you to find out whose land you occupy. The IIP is based in New York City, which is Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape homeland. We honor all the indigenous nations and their land with great gratitude and acknowledge the genocide and continuous displacement of indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose labor built Manhattan during the colonial era and beyond. We acknowledge the harm inflicted upon the indigenous communities and people of color across the country, which inspires our ongoing work. We would also like to acknowledge the harms caused by law enforcement throughout American history, especially in the wake of recent events and the killing of George Floyd. The content in today's discussion may be particularly sensitive, and we encourage you to step away from your devices and do what is best for your mental health and your safety during this discussion. Before we begin, I want to call to your attention that today would have been Breonna Taylor's 27th birthday. It is imperative that we hold close and remember during these conversations and policy changes that Black women and girls are also victims of police violence, and we should always say her name. Now, I will turn it over to IIP Director Lucy Lang.
Thank you, Shauna. I'd like to begin with a collective moment of silence. To begin our conversation, I'm honored to introduce Valerie Bell, who is an author and activist. Ms. Bell's son, Sean, was killed on his wedding day in 2006 in Queens, New York. She is a member of the Justice Committee, Mothers of the Social Justice Movement, the Institute for Innovation in Prosecution's Officer Involved Fatality Working Group, and Queens for DA Accountability. She is the author of a beautiful memoir, Just 23, available through Amazon. And I would like to invite her to please introduce our work together today by sharing a portion of that memoir. Ms. Bell.
Hi. I always say, to God be the glory in all he has done in my life. That's why I'm able to stand right now in all the turmoil that is going in our society today. She told you when it happened, November 25th, 2006, which will be 14 years this year. And I always like to talk about my son's life, not the 50 shots. So in memory of more so my feelings, the book, Sean Bell, Just 23, it was a release for me to the way I was feeling back at that time. I didn't go to any counseling. I just had my husband, my children. My oldest son is 41, my daughter's 27. They have beautiful grandchildren for us. Those are the ones who gave me the strength in my church family. So I really like to read from this book called Effect Change. I'm going to put the book in front of me, so, I hope that's okay. And people might not understand the difference between affect and effect, but I had to look it up. You think you know the right meaning of it, but effect is a power or ability to bring about results. And you know what those results were when the police officers killed my son and many others. They brought a change in our life. So this poem is called Effect Change. And I always start out with a scripture. The Lord will come as a thief in the night. My life has changed since the death of my son. My husband regards me as the ambassador of justice and peace. I have always walked with a silent demeanor until they stole my son's life. Like thieves in the night, darkness and effective change. Effect change has become my branded name, effective as a fire ignited by a single flame. The spark was created by my burning rage brought on by the death of my son, who died at the hand of ignorance holding a gun, ignorance dressed in blue, ignorance who took a pledge to protect me and you. Betrayed while in a haze, the alcohol creates, facing a state of hate on his wedding day. My son was slain. Injustice was elevated to heights and equaled the seats of magistrates. With lawyers trying to portray the humbleness of those dressed in blue, pleading nonsense, they tried to make it sense to you and I, as if we were blind and void of the ability to comprehend murder and cruel intent. As a delusion was projected as protection, the truth was served in two. Yet we continue to stand until justice reigns through. The mistaken judgment of men changed the life we know. Change it with the cock and reload. They will reap what they have sown. The silent war between the unprotected and the law will only surrender to peace and unity when we affect change. And the effect change that we're doing now in New York is trying to change bills. I always tell everybody to vote. Not just vote, but stay on the backs of the legislators. Knock on their doors, do what's needed to be done. I tell a lot of people, I have the personal numbers of assemblymen, council people, and senators. Right now in New York, they're in session for the 50A repeal. You probably heard about 50A, came out in the 70s, but the repeal is to allow the officers' misconduct to be shown to the public, because all the misconduct before they kill someone probably led up to the killing. So if we know their misconduct, maybe we can make a stop and change to all the wrongdoings that they're doing now. And we need to have transparency and accountability. Thank you so much, everyone.
And change the law.
And as my husband always says, we need change. We need to change the laws. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. To begin today's conversation, I'm pleased to introduce our partner at the Alliance for Safe Traffic Stops, Jackie Carter. Jackie is the president of that alliance and the inventor of Not Reaching. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Carter.
Thank you, Lucy. First, I want to thank you for allowing me to participate in this important forum. And I also want to extend my sincerest condolences for all of those on the panel who have lost loved ones by the hands of those who are given the duty to serve and protect. I am the inventor of the Not Reaching pouch and the president of the Alliance for Safe Traffic Stops, which we call ASTS. I created Not Reaching after Philando lost his constitutional right to live during a routine traffic stop on July 6th of 2016. That was the same day our son Justin was celebrating his 30th birthday. I immediately felt a deep connection with Philando, and I made it a commitment to create something that could be a solution. Not Reaching is a vehicle identification pouch that clips to your driver's side air vent, and it holds your license, registration, and insurance. So when you're pulled over for a traffic stop, you no longer have to reach. And every police officer I interviewed stated that the reaching and the sudden movements are what makes them nervous and escalates traffic stops. I partnered with my friend Valerie Castille for the past 2 years, and she has graciously given out Not Reaching pouches when she speaks about traffic stops. My husband Wayne has a great line. He says, "Don't hold court on the side of the road." We have been taught how to drive, but we haven't been taught how to handle a traffic stop. So we created our nonprofit organization called the Alliance for Safe Traffic Stops, ASTS. Our mission is, by promoting education, training, awareness, and the use of technology, we are committed to de-escalating tensions and eliminating physical harm among motorists and law enforcement during traffic stops. ASTS has adopted the toolkit and held its first use of force forum in January in Alexandria, Virginia, with our hosts, Valerie Castille and John Choi. Our goal is to work alongside Valerie and others to get the toolkit in the hands of prosecutors, law enforcement, and community members across the country so that all use of force cases are handled properly and that the community is not secondary in fact-finding, but primary. And for more information about Not Reaching, you may visit notreaching.com, and the Alliance for Safe Traffic Stops is at allianceforsafetrafficstops.org. Thank you, and I'll hand it back to Lucy.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. The toolkit that she's referring to will be exploring further in the course of this conversation, but it is the result of a year-long working group that most of the members of this call and a number of other community members, law enforcement, and prosecutors participated in over the course of 2018. Before we begin the conversation, I'd like to introduce the remarkable panelists we have together today in alphabetical order. John Choi is the County Attorney of Ramsey County, Minnesota. He is the first Korean-American chief prosecutor in the country and has become a national leader in progressive justice reform, especially around gender-based violence. Amongst other initiatives, he has successfully advocated to reform state drug laws, redirect savings to community reinvestment, and establish a veterans court. Jonathan Parham has nearly 30 years of law enforcement experience, retiring as chief of police of the Linden, New Jersey Police Department. Jonathan then served with the Union County Sheriff's Office, where he provided oversight for the Internal Affairs Unit, the Professional Standards Unit, and the Legal Process Unit. He's currently serving as the Director of Countywide Police Policy, Planning, and Training with the Union County Prosecutor's Office. He chairs the New Jersey Attorney General's Office Defensive Tactics Working Group, where he is revising training and policy for the state. Stephanie Morales was the first woman to be elected Commonwealth's attorney in Portsmouth, Virginia, after which she immediately created sustainable programming aimed at reforming the criminal justice system that has been embraced by her community. She has committed her office to a community prosecution model focused on ensuring the community is safe and procedurally just. Valerie Castille is an activist and advocate. Her only child, Philando Castile, was murdered by a police officer in 2016 in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. Mrs. Castile is a member of the IIP's Officer Involved Fatality Working Group and has dedicated herself to helping families who have lost a loved one to gun violence by developing the Philando Castile Relief Foundation in honor of her son. Victoria Davis is an activist, organizer, student, public health worker, and founder of a community-based organization. Her brother Delrawn was killed in 2016 in Brooklyn by police. She is a member of the Justice Committee, the IIP Officer Involved Fatality Working Group, and a founder of Sisters of the Movement. Thank you all so much for being with us here today. Before we begin talking about recent events and the important calls for action, I want to invite each participant to set the stage with what it is that brings you to this urgent conversation today.
I'll be able to say something first. Thank you so much. Of course, the killing of George Floyd bring us here today, will bring me here and all of us that is on this website today for the killing of him being choked. It just brings back the memories of Eric Gardner back in 2014, the same kind of killing. And just to be a voice for not only Sean, but for others, to let them know that we are just tired of what's going on. I know all the protesting and rallying is all good, as long as it's done in peacefully and in order. But the looting and the burning down is not necessary, because you have to think, all this is said and done, but within 2 weeks to a month, and when it's time to go back to your community, what kind of store are you going to go to? Not saying that people in that community burn down the places. It could be people coming from other states that I'm hearing coming in Minnesota, going to different states and doing this horrible burning down, which is not necessary. We have to continue our voice to make a change. We have to write it down, as I say, have a vision. And your voice is very powerful. And then the victory will be won if you continue to speak about the things that are being done senseless and wrong to our people of color. And that only happens to the people of color. There's so many races that are being killed, but they're ones who are out there. If you have to go out alone, I always say, I like Martin Luther King's quote, step out on faith. Don't wait for the staircase, just step out. So if you have to go along and be powerful in your voice, there will be people to follow you to help make that change. Thank you so much.
On the subject of Minnesota, Mr. Choi, could you speak to what brings you to the conversation today?
Could you guys hear that? I wasn't sure if I was muted or not.
You're perfect now.
Oh, great. Sorry. So sadly, we are all here together again. Many of the people that are on this call, I've been in spaces with to try to prevent these tragedies from happening. And this past, some 10 days now, I've just felt so broken, devastated. And it's just been really heartbreaking for our community. I represent the jurisdiction that neighbors Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And so we're viewed as the Twin Cities. And so this has been something that's been very traumatic for our community. But what brings me to this work and the work that we've been doing before all of this is I just want all of this to stop. We've got to figure out a way to reduce the numbers of people being killed at the hands of police. And the convening that I've been a part of with many of the people that are on this panel, the survivors of police violence, I have learned so much. And I think one of the things that we need to be doing in systems, whether it's for sure the police, but also prosecutors, that we have to work with and listen to and actually act upon what those individuals who are the most impacted are telling us. And at the end of the day, we've got to figure out some solutions so that we can stop these killings that are happening. And then more importantly, we need to address, I think, some really fundamentally important conversations around racism that exist in policing and in our systems. And today, in the memory of George Floyd, I hope that we can start these conversations all across this country and start to enact meaningful change. And that's what brings me here today again.
Thank you. Ms. Castille, you have talked about how you moved to Minnesota to have a better life for Philando. So can you share with the audience a bit about how you feel finding yourself here all over again?
I am here out of pure frustration and love. I am so frustrated because here we are again. You know, this horrible murder happened in Minnesota. It's as horrible as what happened to Philando. We're talking about here in Minnesota, a 30-foot scroll with over 150 names on it of people who have been killed by the police. And no one is being held accountable. Now, what happened to Mr. Floyd, as ugly as it was and as nasty as it was, it's not isolated. This type of behavior by the police has been going on for hundreds of years. His murder was the straw that broke the camel's back, because we've been going through this and fighting for this and talking about the same thing. We've had so many working groups. We've had so many recommendations. We've done this, we've done that. We sat and talked. I've sat and talked for 4 years, but here I find myself again. The same situation. And I think we've covered everything that you could possibly imagine about what we should do and what we could do, but nothing is being implemented. We got that toolkit, wonderful set of guidelines, wonderful recommendations, but it's gathering dust. Okay, we have working groups that was a part of the Dayton Governor Dayton. They did a working group and came up with a bunch of recommendations. That's gathering dust. It's just a lot that we've gone over, we've covered, and we have talked, and we have walked, and we have screamed, we have cried, but yet again, here we are with George Floyd. And we're not going to talk about the ones in between that didn't get the national attention that Mr. Floyd got since 2016 up until 2020, right here in the state of Minnesota. At least 8 other people have been killed by the police. So let's understand that this is not just about George Floyd. This is about a system that continuously murders Black and brown people. And I personally think right now we should be sitting at the table going over every state's use of force policies. That's where the problem is. We're talking about accountability. First, we got to get past those vague laws. See, that is the problem, because you can get any seasoned attorney that would go in there and flip those words around and have you thinking something that you didn't see. You see these things happen time after time. You see it with your own eyes. And then the words get twisted up and flipped around, and then they say, well, it's the law. It's the law. Okay, we're talking about a reasonable officer. This is a reasonable officer. You've taken a life. You've taken a life. And this is what a reasonable officer would do. You stood in front of your friends and your family and took this oath in front of God to protect and serve, and you're doing the total opposite. And we're sitting back, you know, chanting and marching and praying and crying, and we've done all these things. We should be at the table, going through those books, making some laws that are ironclad, so they can't come in and twist the words, and then this person is acquitted, walk away. You feel like they had a medical condition, they were under drugs, so you deserve to die.
Thank you, Ms. Castille. Since you raise accountability, I want to ask Ms. Morales to talk a bit about what brings you here, about your experiences as a Black woman prosecutor in this function, and also about the possibility for accountability here based on your experience actually taking an officer-involved tragedy to trial and securing a conviction.
Thank you so much. And the very first thing that you said is what I want to emphasize. I'm here first, and I'm always in every space first as a Black woman, as a mother of 4 Black children, and as a daughter of the city where I'm elected to serve. And I have to first acknowledge, before I talk about any case, that we are a society that is plagued with racism. We are plagued with systemic oppression and inequity. And it has been my goal throughout the entire duration of serving since 2015 to work towards restorative justice and towards correcting the inequities and the oppression that we currently see in our system. And so in 2015, around 3 months after being elected, my city tragically lost a son, William Chapman II, on April 22nd, 2015, to police violence. And I stepped in immediately to be a part of leading that investigation, decided to charge and decided to lead the prosecution from my office representing the Commonwealth through a year of pretrial motion before having a week-long jury trial, after which there was accountability in my city in the form of a guilty verdict for voluntary manslaughter at the conclusion of the jury trial. It was imperative for me not just to ensure that there was accountability for the law enforcement officer who took a life, a son of my community, but also it was important for me at the time to be accountable myself to my community by personally leading the prosecution team and being a part of that trial team from my office to say, you know, this is the first time that we've seen this play out in this way, and it is my responsibility to demand justice for my city and to ensure that we did everything in our power to be there for the family every step of the way. And so that was the beginning of my work with IIP and working with that officer-involved fatality working group that all of us here have worked on. And I have to say that even working with the family in Portsmouth, my relationship and my appreciation for the families here today has really taken a toll on me personally and led me every step of the way in thinking about how I act and how I conduct myself and the level of accountability that I owe to my entire community and to families who are dealing with police violence. And so I am so thankful and grateful for this conversation where we get to really explore the true problems that we face in our society, and also that we have to acknowledge that accountability is possible. We have to be willing to fight for it. And we have to have people who will step up into the elected roles who are willing to take on that fight, no matter how difficult or unpopular that fight may be.
Ms. Davis, the case against your brother's killer went to trial as well, but sadly had a very different result. And yet you have leveraged that sorrow into an incredible career in activism and advocacy. Can you talk a bit about the Justice Committee and the work that you and your colleagues are doing on these issues now?
Right now, the focus is on repealing 58, the Police Secrecy Act, and also on decreasing or defunding the police, right? So the police has this inflated budget that can be used for children. Traditionally, there are summer camps here in New York City, there's pools, there's just all types of activities that can be used for children. And so the NYPD is proposing that they use that budget for Lord knows what. But I myself, as a mother of a 1-year-old and a 9-year-old, who is also a New York City worker for the Department of Health, I don't think that's acceptable, because in many ways, we're impacted. And so defunding the police is a priority. The work that I do and that I continue to do, it feels like an obligation for a lot of reasons. All of these cases are extremely triggering. There are so many cases in between Delrawn and George Floyd. What is, I guess, disheartening is that, well, before I say what's disheartening, what I'm happy about is that there are people who are involved, especially the young people. Like, I'm really proud of the young people. The young people are out there. The young people want change. They may not know how to get change, but they know that they want change. And they're doing something, anything, because I think that even for me, like, you know, when Delrawn was killed, my body just felt like I want to do something. What can I do? But I don't know. We're not prepared for these things. When people are killed by the police, especially some people who are our loved ones, right? We don't know what to do. So our initial reaction is to think, what can I do? Am I capable of doing it? And how can I do it? So I just want to say that I'm thankful for the young people, because it may not look how we would want it to look, or some people want it to look, but it looks how they want it to look, because they feel it in their heart that they need to do something. And I think that that's so powerful. It's disheartening that it had to take for George Floyd to be killed. And I mean, I never watched the video. I will never watch the video. Everyone has inboxed me, everyone has called me and told me how George Floyd called for his mom. I spent, like, I think a whole day in tears, because then I found out his mom, you know, passed away. She's not here amongst us and living, right? And so that's the reason why I fight for Delrawn. Our mom died when we were children. And so to hear that George was crying, like he's a grown man who was crying for his mom. I started to wonder, what did Delrawn feel like, and if he cried out for our mom? Because Delrawn, he lived a life where he missed my mom. She had him at 16. She died when she was only 29. Delrawn was 12. I was 9. My other brother was 6, right? And so for me, George Floyd's death isn't just like another death. It's like, damn, what did Delrawn feel in that moment? Because I'm his sister who has to stand for him because he doesn't have a mom. And so like George Floyd's siblings are standing for him as well. And these are really strange positions to be put in because we just don't know what to do. But I believe in any and all tactics. Something has to be done, whether it's at the policy level, whether it's the protesters, whether it's whatever. But we definitely have to be thankful for the youth because they're going to be ones to save us because their minds are clean and clear and we can teach them. Actually, right after this, I have to teach some 11th and 12th graders, right, on police killings. But we have to be thankful for the youth. We have to, because they're going to be the ones to save us because they're not jaded yet. And hopefully they aren't. And so I'm here because, and I show up in every space from a level of educating because there's just so many layers to police killings that we haven't been able to, obviously haven't been able to fix, because we'll fix one thing supposedly, and then something, but we haven't fixed the other thing. So it's like a house. If the whole foundation of the house isn't concrete and it isn't operating correctly, something eventually is going to fall. And that's what we see is happening now because these police killings keep happening. And it's extremely triggering that they're happening on video. And it's like people are being lynched and everyone's buying a ticket, except for you don't have to buy a ticket anymore because you can log on to your Facebook or Instagram and someone has inboxed it to you. So I always invite people to stop watching those videos. The death of Black men shouldn't be, and it isn't entertaining. I don't know.
Thank you. Mr. Parham, since Ms. Davis raises some questions about prevention, I wonder if you can speak a bit as a Black man and a career police officer, both to what brings you to this conversation today and what you make of the discussions about divestment from law enforcement and other ideas about potential solutions that are geared not at accountability ultimately, but that are geared at prevention.
Yes, first, thank you for allowing me to sit in on the forum. I'm absolutely and extremely humbled and sorrowful. What has brought me here is the extreme level of disgust that I have for the killing of Black men needlessly. Having been a law enforcement officer and been in the trenches, I've been a part of those, or I've been privy to the conversations of my counterparts. I joined a police department that had very few minorities, and there seemed to be a free field to voice their opinions about men, women, minorities. It doesn't make a difference. The racism was apparent. The police department didn't exactly exhibit a lot of overt racism, but it's the covert things that affected me. Not only me, but the other officers that were part of it. I'm here wanting to be a part of the fix. That's my job, to be a part of the fix. And I've been privy to those conversations and also some of the trainings and the developments that have helped move things along. And so I want to contribute that to this discussion.
Thank you. Ms. Castile and Mr. Choi, you have a unique relationship amongst the panelists. Can you share a little bit about how you came to know one another and how you worked together during the investigation, prosecution, and aftermath of the trial against Philando's killer?
Valerie, I think you're on mute. Did you want to start?
Yeah, he had me on mute. I was just saying that Philando was shot and killed in his vehicle. He got stopped for a broken tail light, and he had a relatively pleasant conversation with the police, and he respected his authority and called him sir and informed him that he had a weapon in the car. And at that point, he was shot 5 times with his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter in the vehicle. I thought it was important that I speak to John personally so that I can let him know who my son was and what he represented as a Black man and who I am as his mother. Because a lot of times you see that children are replicas of their parents. But I needed to show John something as well, because he had a relationship with my son and he didn't realize it. So ultimately, there was the trial, and of course, the officer was acquitted, even though there was video evidence and what I was saying about the policies being so vague and how they can use these word games and flip up what you saw with your eyes. You saw a police officer take someone's life, but you said that wasn't murder. It wasn't manslaughter. So in essence, they were saying, my son deserved to die for whatever you think, whatever you think. But since then, John and I have maintained a really great relationship, because he's very understanding, and he knows exactly what Philando represented as a man, regardless of how the media always tries to re-victimize the victim and make them look as bad as they possibly can. But John and I stayed friends, and we were both on the development of the 2 kid, and we have a great relationship. We talk about a lot of things. We still conversate to this day. I love him dearly. He tried. It's a thing where, when you up against a system that's designed to fail you, you can't win. You fighting a system that was designed, it's broken. You designed it the way that it's designed. So how can you fix something that's already designed to fail? So with that, I love John, and we had a great relationship, and he did the best his office could do. But with the system that you're fighting, it's almost inevitable that these officers are not prosecuted, or if they are, the time is so minimal, it pretty much breaks your heart all over again. So yeah.
So the relationship that I had with Philando that I did not know, and this is when Valerie came into the office during the investigation. What I found out through the conversation, and just first of all expressing my deep sadness about what had happened to Philando, and in the course of that conversation, what I found out was that I helped Philando in another piece of his life much earlier. I had created a driving diversion program. There are so many people in the state of Minnesota, because of just living paycheck to paycheck, who can't get access to a driver's license again after they have been suspended because they didn't pay a speeding ticket or whatever it was. And Philando was a graduate of that program. And I oftentimes think about that because in one sense I was able to help them, but in the most important sense, and for Valerie and for all those that love Philando, we failed in that regard to bring justice in that case. And that's one of the things that I have to live with. And so in many ways, I've kind of taken that deep sadness and that lament of not being able to bring justice for Valerie and her family and in our community, to turn that sadness and grief and lament into action. And it's been really wonderful to be able to develop a relationship with Valerie and Clarence, advocating for changes to develop a toolkit through the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution, to work with Jackie Carter and to talk about some of the things that we want to see change. And in many ways, the relationship that I have had with Philando, whether I knew it or not, and then with Valerie and with Philando's uncle Clarence, has really changed me as a human being. I'm a different person than I was when back in 2016 today, and I'm a very different prosecutor. And the different prosecutor that I am is I fully recognize and will acknowledge the importance that we have to be independent and eliminate those biases that exist. And if they do exist, that it's my job to call them out, to create spaces where those biases don't exist. And so that's been the journey that I have been on. And in many ways, it's changed my life and it's changed my professional relationships with police and all of that. But I understand that it's my duty and responsibility to stand for justice and to make sure that the role of the prosecutor is always an independent one. And I think that's so critical for us as a nation to recognize that despite the fact that we have lots of respect for police and the work that they do, we have to hold them accountable when they break the law. And we have to have some of these hard conversations, especially within police departments. It's so wonderful now to see some police chiefs around the country and many, many officers who are actually standing out and speaking out and saying, what I saw was wrong. And I'm not going to let that happen in my agency. If we want to change all of this, it has to start within that culture, within those police departments, so that people can stand up and say that, you know, they don't want to be a part of this, and they can have a new way of developing a police culture, because I think that's a big part of why we have this problem still to this day.
I want to ask Ms. Morales to share some thoughts on that subject, but first just to lift up that I just see that Minneapolis has agreed to ban all chokeholds by police and to require bystanding officers to stop them. So it does matter, Ms. Castille, the advocacy does matter. And I think that I speak on behalf of certainly the whole IIP in our gratitude for the advocacy that you provide. Ms. Morales?
Thank you. First of all, Ms. Val, both of you, and my sister Victoria, I love you all so much. You all are so strong. And, you know, the ability for you to even articulate what you have experienced, and Victoria, for you to talk about wondering what Delrawn felt, I'm just heartbroken. And I think as a country, as a nation, the reason why we are seeing the uprising and the demand for real change and overhaul of this system that has oppressed and has killed our sons and daughters is because our hearts are collectively broken. People are getting a window into your souls and feeling that hopelessness that you feel. And I want to tell you to take heart, because Ms. Val, these convictions can be had. Justice can be had. We are not hopeless, and we are not unable to do this job. People simply have to want to do the job. And that means not just prosecutors, but that means when we talk about community member participation, that does not end at voting. That does not end at demanding charges and demanding justice. There is something in the middle, and it's called jury service. We have to pay attention to who our clerks of courts are. We have to make sure that we have representative juries that represent the makeup of our community, so that our sons and daughters, so that your sons, your brother, have jurors and members of our community who understand their plight, who understand their lives, who relate to them as they deliberate and are fact finders on these cases. And I guarantee you, we will not have a hopeless situation where we never see justice and we never see convictions, because that is the reality of my community. It was a very quiet process, but there were members of the community who were involved every step of the way. As I fought, there were jurors who showed up to be a part of evaluating the facts and the evidence as it came in. And so this is not a situation where I want you all to lose heart. I know your hearts are broken. My heart is broken, and our entire nation is hurting. And now is the time for us to stand up and say, we can have this. And if you are not interested in accountability, and if you are not interested in a true system of justice for everybody, then do not hold these elected positions. Do not hold these leadership positions. Move out of the way so that someone who truly believes in making sure that all of us are safe and protected, and that we will not continue down this destructive path where we are constantly losing Black lives, allow them to step up and lead if you can't do it. And so I love you guys so much. And I'm so proud to do this work with you and to call you my friends and my sisters.
Thinking about this in a bigger context of the obligation of a prosecutor to community, Ms. Morales, I know that the idea of prevention is very much a part of your office's ethos with your Future Leaders Initiative and your social media programming in schools. But I want to ask you to share a kind of term that I've heard you use before about officer accountability and accountability for other people in your community. If you know what I'm talking about, if you could share it with the group.
I do. And so if you listen to me talk about our system, many people refer to it as the criminal justice system. And after spending so much time with other experts and looking at what's going on in our nation and in my community and everywhere, I refer to it as the criminal legal system now. Because what we actually have has not been a system of justice, but it has been a system of accountability for some and not for all. And by that, I mean the members of my community who are not law enforcement, who are not elected officials, who don't hold any special status. We find that there is accountability for their actions and for their mistakes, and sometimes their hardships that translate into a violation of the law, but there is no accountability for other people in the system who have power. And so I am seeking a system of accountability for everyone. That's what I believe in. That's what I have believed in and have been talking about that ever since before I took office. And that's what manifested itself in the prosecution and conviction of this police officer for killing this unarmed 18-year-old young Black man in my city, William Chapman II. And so I will, shout it from the rooftops constantly about the need to fight constantly for accountability. But again, that starts from within. The leaders have to be accountable themselves enough to push past any discomfort, any desire to continue to be polite, because this is a matter of life and death.
Mr. Parham, can you speak a bit to this leadership question?
Whenever there's something that's going on and we tend to see it manifest in the officers' actions on the street, we look at it and we say, hey, maybe there's a bad apple. Maybe that officer is bad. Maybe that cop is bad. We want justice or revenge, or we want to get rid of that officer. I think that we have a mistake when we do that. What we need to do is connect the dots looking backwards and see what was done or not done to allow the officer to, one, think that their performance would be acceptable, two, to give them the ability to do that, or not, or maybe not the training that they should have had, or the supervisory capacity that should have been there before they committed these acts. And then also the leadership from the very top. It is important that the executive sets the tone. From the executive, then you can look at the command level officers and the mid-level managers and the supervisors, and ultimately the officer on the street. They will do what the leader says to do, what the leader says is important. If there is no accountability for the leader, if we don't look at the officer who made this terrible mistake and then backtrack to all the leadership failures, we're missing a tremendous opportunity to make these things better. We can't just remove this one piece and say we've done something, we've got the fix, and leave leadership out of the picture.
one area for potential exploration on the policy front is this question of risk management in police agencies. I wonder if you could speak a bit to what that means and how it could potentially look in law enforcement with an eye towards preventing these tragic outcomes.
Yes. So what's a risk? A risk is the chance of something going wrong. There is no other riskier profession out there that I can think of than law enforcement. Think about what we do. We have this recipe for risk where we have 25-year-olds who come in with a limited worldview. They're given firearms and the ability to deny freedom to enter your home and to ultimately take your life and then go home at the end of the day. If there are no controls set on that, we can see this incident that we're here talking about over and over and over again. Risk management says, what are those things that cause us problems? What are those things that create losses for us? Let's identify them and work to mitigate them before the thing happens. Let's look at those precursors, those pre-incident indicators that identify the bad behavior is coming. It may not be bad when we see it first, but we know that we have an officer or officers or a particular shift that is leaning in one direction, and it takes supervision to take a look at those things and stop it before it gets to the end result, which is that misconduct or that really bad behavior that ends up being criminal. We cannot accept just firing an officer, just prosecuting an officer, and not looking at the risk management idea of let's prevent this from happening to all the other officers. If we fail to do that, if we fail to take the risk management look, we're just waiting or biding our time for the next disaster.
First, I see in the Q&A that there's a great outpouring of love and gratitude to Ms. Davis, Ms. Castille, and Ms. Bell. And so I send that to you from the more than 350 people who are tuning in live right now to hear these stories. But I want to put to you a question from the audience about whether you have seen change, and what do you see as the obstacles, and what do you see as the aspirations at this stage?
Was that question directed to? Is that directed to me?
You or Ms. Davis or Ms. Bell?
The girl, I got lost on that one because I wasn't looking for that one. But,
have you seen change, Ms. Castille?
No, not necessarily. No. We've been doing a lot of getting together and talking and coming up with the recommendations and things of that nature. You know, that olive branch has been put out there, and we've been doing the talking and everything, but then we constantly have these same results. Like I said, since 2016, probably 8 other people have died in between the death of George Floyd. I mean, it's not just him. There has been other people in between that they just didn't, it wasn't captured on film, and you know, it wasn't put on you know, notarized like that. But we talking about a 30-foot scroll, decades of suppressed emotions. That's what we had here, a suppression of emotion. They was mad about what happened to Philando, but I didn't want that on my hands. I didn't want that in my heart, that people would lose their lives. Because where I come from, these guys got artillery. They wasn't coming throwing rocks and bricks and breaking windows. They wasn't coming with that. They was coming with the noise. And I didn't want that on me. So it's just years of emotions. You in an emotional corner of hurt, of pain, of not knowing what to do. The stomping, the asking, the talking, and still the same results. This is where I'm coming from. These policies have to be changed. They have to be ironclad. And yes, I can do the blueberry story about the moldy blueberry. You put it in the refrigerator, you come back 10 or moldy. You put it back in the refrigerator, you come back a week later, the whole bunch is molded, because you got that one individual in there with that negative mindset. That's, you know, these new recruits come in, and this is what they're teaching them. All that stuff they got taught in the academy is non-existent, because they riding with this guy, and this guy is showing them the wrong leadership. And so now you got multiple people out there terrorizing the city. And if you look at it, both of those guys have been reprimanded. They've been written up because they over there on that south side terrorizing people over there. Let's keep it 100. It's all about what you hear. They hear locker room talk. They don't say anything, and then they come in the neighborhood and say, you know, if you see something, why you should say something. Why don't you say something? Stop that culture. You say something. When you hear this type of talk in the locker room, why don't you go to your captain and say, I think Sergeant so-and-so is having a problem, you know, I heard him say this and I heard him say that, because it's an emotional job. You know, if they sensitive, they human too. Something may happen at home and they bring that garbage to work and take it out on somebody else. Y'all know, you know about the psychology, you know, the husband get fired, he come home, slap the wife, the wife beat the kids, and the kid kick the dog. It's the same thing. But we have to take care of our community, and we have to take care of our police officers as well. Because if you got 150 cases where people have been murdered and no one is held accountable, you mean to tell me 150 people were wrong and your 150 police were right? I don't know what kind of math you doing, but something wrong with that math. But I'm hopeful. I'm gonna keep on talking. I'm gonna keep sitting. I'm gonna keep being on panels until I get that call and say, you know what? Why don't you come to the office and bring some of the community with you, and we'll go over these use of force policies, and we'll see what it is that's hindering us and what's so vague that it can be flipped either way, and it's up to the attorney who can spin the best lie.
I know that it's, I'm sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
hopeful.
It is 2 o'clock, and I know that some of the panelists have to excuse themselves, but before we do that, I'm going to ask anyone who's able to stick around to please stay, because we have some really smart questions from the audience that I would love to put to the remaining panelists. But before you duck out, those of you who need to, I would love to ask that each of you just take a one sentence or two to address people across the country who are suffering right now. Ms. Davis?
Sorry, I don't have my James Baldwin quote with me. My mind is not there to remember it. But he definitely spoke of change, and change is going to come from within, and change is going to have to come from earnest, honest conversation, and just being realistic about what change is, what change looks like from ourselves first. And then we can bring that on to other people. Sometimes people feel that they can't do anything because they don't have the capacity to protest or rally. Change can come from having a conversation with your family members who are saying things that are not conducive to the life of Black people, to the life of Black people who are being killed by police. So I think that change it starts from within, and then we use that change. We don't hold on to it and hoard it, but we use it to educate, and then we do something about it. We make it an actionable item. And change doesn't always look like just protesting. It can be policy. It can be through different careers. It can be through a lot of different things. But if we spend our time pointing our fingers at this person can't make change because they do this, and that person can't make change because they do that, then we're going to continue going in a circle, and change will not come. I mean, the days of singing hymns and asking for change will come are over. We cannot do that. We have to have actionable items, and we have to be honest. And when someone's speaking to us and they're saying, oh, I want to make a difference, I want to make a change, hold them to it, hold them accountable. I tell people all the time, hold me accountable. If I said that I want change and I show up in spaces and I'm always here, there, and everywhere, make sure that I'm actually making change, and I'm not creating situations where things are worse. I'm not making people feel more despair. Hold me accountable. And the way you hold me accountable, hold yourself, your community, and your coworkers and family members, etc., accountable. But it has to be actionable.
Thank you. Mr. Parham, maybe some words to families who are suffering, and then I'd ask you to incorporate an answer to some questions we had, including from John Jay faculty who teach future law enforcement. And the questions include, how can we teach young people who aspire to careers in law enforcement to enter with the kind of mentality that you're describing? And then how can people who are not in leadership positions in law enforcement be enfranchised to speak out against the kind of culture you described?
My message to everyone is a quote from the Bible, from Esther 4:14. It basically asks, for who knows if you were appointed for such a time as this. We all have a purpose in life. And when you feel that thing that's pulling on you, that says somebody has to do something, that somebody is you, and it is your job to figure out what that something is. And that's what this panel is for, and that's what all this pain and all this discussion is for. As for the future law enforcement officers, coming into law enforcement, we all say the same thing when you ask them, hey, why do you want to be a cop? Why do you want to be an agent? I want to help people. That's usually the answer. Matter of fact, I think 99 out of 100 people will say, we'll give that answer. The next question that we want to ask them is, what does that mean to you? What does helping people mean? And most people will say something like, I want to lock people up. See, that's where we have a problem. It's defining what your motivations are when you walk through the door. Trying to figure out, why are you here in the first place? Not hiring the person who believes that running and gunning and slamming people on the ground is what cops do. Listen, there's no doubt that there are times when police officers have to use force, but there's also an understanding that we use way too much of it, and way too often, and usually at the wrong times. There are tons of professional police officers that I've worked with that are just fantastic guys. And then there's always that one or two, and we all know them, that you just don't even want to show up to their job. But the problem is not only them, it is, do we have the courage to stop them? Do we have the ability to step in front of them and say, you won't do that, I'm not accepting that, and not just stop them, but say something about it so that we remove them from future incidents that could occur. That's tough. That's tough to do. And so that's the number one lesson that we need to teach law enforcement officers as they're coming into the profession. You need to have courage. You are required to step in and stop those bad behaviors. And to the last part of those who are not in a leadership position, I would just say that there is no law enforcement officer who is not in a leadership position. There are none. There's no human that's not in a leadership position. You have the ability to step up and stand for a cause, make your voice heard, and then after you've said something, you are required to do something.
Follow-up question with a request for a quick answer. Do you have a view on whether unions are part of this question?
That you have to have the unions in on every discussion. For me to criticize the unions, their purpose is good. It's their true purpose is to protect the workers. And I understand that there are some management positions that look down on the workers and can abuse them. So the purpose of the union is there to make sure that the workers are taken care of. In some cases, it goes too far. In some cases, we're protecting the very people who do these bad things over and over again, allowing them an opportunity to stay on the job, to take taxpayer money, and to commit these acts that shouldn't be committing. The union leaders need to be at the table when we're talking about the pain that everyone is feeling and what the cost for the solutions are, without a doubt.
Thank you. Mr. Choi, Ms. Morales, a question from the audience about what do you think prosecutors could do differently in their relationships with police departments to help solve for these problems?
So I think you guys can all hear me now. I think the very first thing that all prosecutors in America should recognize is that when on a daily basis you work with the police to bring forward and work on cases, that inherently that bias exists. I've talked to so many prosecutors in America who believe that they are unbiased, and maybe they're not aware of some of these biases that exist, but we have to acknowledge that. And I think we have to listen to the people, even if it's perceived and it's not real. The reality is that that's enough. And so I think then we have to think about if we're going to maintain the prosecution of these cases, that we have to be very intentional about making sure that we are doing everything that we can to develop a framework of how we think about our role and have the conversations on a regular basis with those staff who would be involved and officer involved responding to those types of incidents, and also with the investigative agencies that we work with to ensure that we're taking into account those types of things. So I think the first thing is we got to stop pretending that there isn't a natural possibility of a bias that exists. And then recognizing what the role of the prosecutor is in every case, not just in officer-involved shootings, but it's to be independent. We have to be a check on the police. We represent the people. We don't represent crime victims. We don't represent the police. We represent the people as ministers of justice. We need to recalibrate and orientate ourselves in that sense. So even beyond officer-involved fatality incidents, it's about the prosecutor's role in maintaining Brady lists and putting people on them and recognizing what your role is in that particular area, or what if you are aware of a certain officer who is a problem for our community, that you recognize that the role of the office and the people that work under you is to ensure that these matters are appropriately taken care of. So I think that's where it really begins in terms of that mindset, because in many ways, I think that mindset in terms of the role of the prosecutor does not exist.
Ms. Morales, I'm going to ask you to respond to that as well, but if you could wrap in a response to this question from the audience, which is the cause of this is clearly racism and white supremacy. How do you think that DAs can be leaders in addressing racism, anti-Blackness, and white supremacy that exists in American police departments, in prosecutors' offices, and in culture writ large? Can you give some specific action steps?
First of all, I got to go there first. So one, I love that. Call it what it is. For too long, we have been, people have been uncomfortable talking about racism and white supremacy, and have been uncomfortable being, the person to disrupt the peaceful existence that some people have enjoyed. And so that's the number one thing, is we have to call it what it is, and we have to say, with in no uncertain terms, that there is racism and there is white supremacy. And when we start talking about police departments, we have to stop feeding into this notion that we can sensitivity train and anti-bias train our way out of some people who are just racist. You cannot remove racism from a person's heart. And so at the outset of police departments' evaluations of who they're bringing on board as public servants, you know, and our brother on here who is the police chief said that everyone is a leader. Well, all people who are police officers, they are public servants first before they're police officers, and they should have a love for all community members, regardless of their race, their socioeconomic status, or anything. And so at the beginning, at the outset, when we're talking about these evaluation processes and lie detector tests and all these things that happen at different departments to bring people on board, there need to be specific questions around whether you're afraid of Black people, whether you don't like Black people, you know, all of these things that we do traditionally to evaluate who we bring on board, that needs to be a part of the discussion. Racism has to be at the forefront now. We cannot afford to not talk about this or to be polite. We are losing our community members. So that's just one thing. But I had to go there first, and I'm very grateful and appreciative that you called the thing what it is, which is racism and white supremacy. It is real, it does exist, and we have every responsibility and every right to weed that out in this system. And, you know, my brother John, who is a tremendous fighter for justice, I have to say, you know, your perspective on the bias that prosecutors have, that is important to discuss. I personally don't have that because I'm so entrenched in my community. And as a daughter of my city, I work with my community members just as much, if not more, than with the police department. And that is what we have to do. If we don't want to have this bias because we work so closely with police officers, the medicine is work with your community just as much. You report directly to the members of your community. They elected you. They're the ones who live in your jurisdiction. Sometimes the police officers come from another jurisdiction and don't understand or even relate to the members of that community. And so for us, if we want to eliminate that bias, it's not about getting in our own heads and say, okay, don't be biased. You have to take action. And that means we get in these streets with our community members. And Lucy, you mentioned that programming that we have with social media by the Statutes and Future Leaders Initiative, and there's another one, Control Alt Delete. Those provide services to the community. We attempt to develop our future leaders. We engage with our young people. We meet them where they are in school. We bring them to our office. We go in the prisons with Control Alt Delete. We try to get people's rights restored. But ultimately, it's not just about providing a service to the community. It's about getting my prosecutors to relate to the members of the community who they may otherwise not come in contact with. And when they spend time with them, when they spend time with these young people, when they spend time with people who have had trouble with the law, they no longer see them as somebody who's coming through the criminal legal system as a quote unquote defendant or as a case file. They see a person. They see a mother and a father, a sister and a brother, a son and a daughter. So the bottom line is, if we want to fix it, we have to get in the trenches. We have to be hand in hand with our community members, doing everything within our power to meet them where they are and protect them from the ills of our society, and do everything in our power to fight for restorative justice.
Before
I couldn't agree more.
Did you want to add to that, Mr. Choi?
No, I just couldn't agree more. That was beautiful, Stephanie, as you always are in terms of your words.
Thank you, John.
Before I ask Ms. Davis to conclude with some final thoughts, I want to ask each of you prosecutors and Mr. Parham, from a police perspective. This comes from a number of prosecutors who are currently in the audience. What you would say to young people of color who are serving in prosecutors' offices, or young Black people or people of color who are considering a future in those roles. Would you encourage them or not, given the current climate?
So, Jonathan, go ahead, sorry.
No problem. Yes, I absolutely would encourage them. I'll give you a quick story. The reason I became a police officer is because when I was a kid, I saw some police officers assault some of my friends. I ran to my father and I told him what was happening. And that's when he said to me, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to complain or do you have a plan? And I said, someone's got to do something. That's when he shared with me, the someone is you and the something is for you to figure out. At that point, I said, I've got to fix it from within. Now, that was a very wide-eyed view of trying to fix a problem, but I got to tell you, there is a large part of the fix that comes from without, and that there's an incredibly large part of the fix that has to come from within. We need, not only do we need minority law enforcement officers just because it reflects the community, but we need the minority perspective in law enforcement. The empathy that goes along with saying, I understand what you're going through because I've been there. The understanding of what a community looks like from that perspective is needed with the person who's wearing the badge, who has the authority to enforce the laws. So I absolutely would encourage them. I would also say to them, have courage, because it's not going to be easy.
And I would add, I just recently just had this issue with a number of younger attorneys in my office where, this past 10 days or so here in Minnesota, it's just been really tough on all of us. And I had a number of prosecutors who were just kind of struggling over whether or not they could continue to work in this space, to be a part of the system where we know there are so many things that need to fundamentally change, and we are obviously working on them here in Ramsey County. But just hearing that just really shook me to my core, because I'm recognizing that the urgency of the leaders in various offices to allow for these spaces, and also to encourage our staff to take this moment and actually start working on certain things, and developing that proximity with community is so critical. And so I had a number of conversations where I was talking to staff members saying that we can't abandon the work that we've been doing, and we have to continue and keep with it. And luckily, I think those conversations made some impact in terms of just encouraging people that were in it, and assuring that we're going to continue on with the things that we've been working on, and we're going to even go more dramatic in some of the reform measures to really unpack some of the racism in our system, to reduce the mass incarceration footprint, all of these things that are now becoming more clear about why we need to act. And so as dark as this moment is, I believe that George Floyd's life mattered, and it's going to have major significance in terms of our future if we're all paying attention and recognizing that we need to listen to what his death will ultimately can lead to in terms of a better criminal justice system. And as Stephanie says, a criminal legal system. We got to put the justice back into it.
Any concluding thoughts, Ms. Morales?
We need you. It's that simple. This is not a situation where we can afford for, Black people, brown people, people of color to get involved with this criminal legal system. For too long, there has been a lack of representation, a lack of people in power who have the ability to relate to people that just don't look like them. When people look at Black and brown and people of color in the criminal legal system, people who are financially unempowered, folks just look at them and they don't relate. They look at them as a case file. They look at them as a defendant. They look at them as a miscreant. They don't see a family member. They don't see someone who has been hit at their lowest point and is now dealing with a society that has not loved and cared and provided for them. And, really, it's not a situation where it should be an option. This is a situation where this system needs an overhaul, and we're going to need everybody to do it. It is a problem that has been a serious, again, a system of disenfranchisement, a system of oppression for so long. It is going to take a time, effort, and it's going to take all of our talent to turn it around. And so I absolutely commend you if you are thinking about going this route. I applaud you. I ask you to get involved, and I am always a resource for young people who are looking to get into this profession. There goes my cat making a cameo behind me. So please absolutely consider a profession in the law. And if I can be of assistance in any way, Ms. Victoria Davis on this call can attest to it. I am pushing her to end up where I am one of these days. And so I will make my information available. This Future Leaders Initiative is not closed to the people in my city or in my community. I work with people all around the nation. So if you are interested, let's go, let's do it. We absolutely need you. We have to have you.
Thank you for that. We will post those resources and others at www.prosecution.org, along with a recording of this very important conversation. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of the really thoughtful questions from the audience, but I appreciate all of you who took the time to be here, to be part of this conversation. I want to thank the incredible team at the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution for creating this moment, for helping build these relationships, and for defining a space in which we can have meaningful conversations that are uncomfortable and difficult, and in many places of our communities just aren't happening across divides. So thank you to my team. But most of all, thanks to the panelists. Thank you to Ms. Bell and Ms. Castille, who've had to excuse themselves. Thank you to Mr. Choi, Ms. Morales, Mr. Parham, for being a part of this. And thank you so much, Ms. Davis, for your friendship, for being here. And I'd ask you to conclude with some final remarks.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Lucy. And thank you, as usual, to my mentor, Stephanie. We'll be there soon. I looked for some quotes that I just love in these spaces. So like, I found James Baldwin. One is, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Another one of my favorites, people can cry much easier than they can change. And I invite people to look those quotes up and just feel them and see how it resonates with them as it resonates with me. I love Zora Neale Hurston. If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. I am here and I'm in all of the spaces that I'm in because I want people to understand that I don't enjoy speaking about my dead brother. I wish that I was, a lot of times people tell me that I'm powerful, I'm so cool, I'm all of these things. And I wish they were saying those things because they were introduced to me because I had already finished law school, which I will. And then I would feel a little less guilty. But either way, I'm humbled by that. And I just wanted to leave this last remark. Every police killing affects everyone in the community, not just the family of the police officer. Not just the family of the police killing victim. The whole community is affected by it, especially in this age of social media where everyone's seeing it. These deaths are not entertaining. They're not an opportunity to uplift or promote organizations for personal gain. These deaths affect generations to come, as they always have. There is no perfect victim. Show up for all victims. Show up for everyone who is a survivor of police brutality. They may not have died, but they're living with the mental, emotional, and physical scars. Show up for the victims who have died at the hands of the police. And never ask, what did the person do? Always ask what happened to them. Humanize these victims. These are people's loved ones. And they are people that we still love. And I've grown to love victims that I've never met before. I can name so many, unfortunately, because I've grown to love them just like you all have. And so I always ask people to never, ever ask, what did they do? Because it's almost, well, not almost, it is saying that you're trying to find a justification for why this person did not deserve their life. And none of us are here to make that decision. And so what did they do doesn't matter. What happened to them? Or maybe you want to know the events, ask that, but never ask, what did they do? And thank you for always receiving me.